So maybe I should cue that up. All right. Let's do this. Okay, 30 seconds and then intro, and then we'll jump right into it. Let's go back here for a sec.
Welcome to the Emerald City Sportscast, hosted by longtime Northwest sports journalist Dan Viennes. News, analysis, and opinions from Dan and his guests on the Mariners, Seahawks, Kraken, and more. And now, here's your host, Dan Viennes.
Welcome back, everybody. I told you I'd be back today, and I kept my word. I don't always do that, but today I did. Kind of had to. Sort of an obligation. Today's a big day. As of, if you're watching the live stream, as of 10 minutes ago, NFL teams can legally tamper. It's such a dumb term. They can legally tamper with free agents. They can officially sign on Wednesday. But as we know, most of the big deals will be done and announced today, not Wednesday. In fact, it didn't take long. Adam Schefter tweeting at about 9 a.m. and 1 second that guard Alex Kappa goes from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to the Cincinnati Bengals on a 4-year, $40 million deal. So that's kind of how it goes, and that's how today is going to go. And, of course, the interesting question for Seahawks fans will be, will they participate on day one? They typically don't, but this year's a little bit different, right? Some things have happened over the last week or so. And we're going to jump right into it, and we're going to talk about some of that stuff, bringing back one of my favorite guests, Seahawks author and reporter and website manager extraordinaire, Chris Cluff, joins me now. Chris, how you been? It's been a minute since we've talked Seahawks on the show.
Yeah, Dan, it's really good to see you. I think it was early last season, last time we had a little chat.
Yeah, and honestly, the reason I haven't been doing shows lately is there hasn't been much to talk about. And what's funny about, I touched on it a little bit on my show yesterday, but what's funny about what happened last week is I've been stumping for a year trying to convince people that, hey, you might not want to believe all this talk about Russell Wilson getting traded is real, because a lot of fans just had their head in the sand and didn't want to believe it. We're convinced it was just, reporters looking for clicks and there was no substance to it. It was real. You and I talked about it a year ago. It was real. And then this offseason, it was so quiet, and both sides did a much better job of keeping it close to the vest, because obviously now we know that the Broncos and Seahawks have been talking as far back as January, that it convinced me that it wasn't going to happen, and then it happens. So we're going to mostly look forward today, but I'd be remiss if we didn't discuss the events of last week, because you and I haven't talked in a while. Just give me your general thoughts on what went down last week, Russell Wilson being traded, Bobby Wagner being released, and how it went down.
Yeah, I always felt like Wilson was going to be traded, even at the combine when Schneider and Carroll came out and basically said we don't intend to trade him, we're not shopping him. Those words didn't say that they weren't going to trade him. So I still felt like it was at least 60%, as I put on one of my posts, that they were going to, and it just turned out they did. They just needed to find someone that Russell Wilson was really comfortable with and wanted to go to. And apparently he researched 14 teams. He graded them down according to Peter King. He put grades on all kinds of things for him. On Denver was his top team, the team that he was willing to waive his no trade clause for. So all things come to end. All good things will end, and it's been a great run. It was a great decade with him and Bobby Wagner. Yeah. It kind of signals the very end of that Super Bowl run for sure. And now it's kind of a new thing, and we're going to see how they do it. I mean, can they do it in 1 year? Can they do it in 2? Can they even do it before there's a switch over to maybe a new coach? We'll see.
It's interesting. I feel like as much as Most of Seahawk fandom was in shock the first couple of days. I think now that more of this information comes out, and you touched on it, now they see that Russ wanted out badly. This wasn't just him seeing the Denver Broncos and thinking that was a perfect situation. He researched 14 teams. This was a guy, it reminded me of times in my career where I was so unhappy with my job that I cast a wide net and I just wanted out. 14 teams. That means he looked into some really shitty situations, and some bad teams had to be on that list. He was looking for any opportunity he could find to take his brand to the next level, or to find a new situation. I think fans, a lot of people I've talked to that were crushed last week, kind of see it for what it is now. And it takes a little bit of the sting off, knowing that, I mean, he just didn't want to be here anymore.
Yeah, I think there's always been kind of two sets of fans, the ones who are like, Russell Wilson to the end, and that they will love him forever and he can do no wrong. And then there are those who just kind of understand that he's equally, to blame for some of the issues on offense, because he clearly has some limitations as a quarterback.
Yeah.
And, you can just kind of see those, manifest themselves in games where he just can't see over the middle. He can't get the ball away quickly on middle throws. And he just has a stubbornness about throwing deep and things like that on third and short or whatever. So, there was a clash there, and we saw it between him and Pete. And just, it's always subtle. It's always subtle, because Russ never wants to look like the bad guy, and he never wanted to say he wanted to leave. But the change in his language was clear over the last year, where he basically said, he went from saying, I always want to stay in Seattle for my entire career, to things happen, trades happen, change happens. So you just got to be open to it. I love where I am right now. And you could see how his language changed. And that, to me, was the indicator that he was ready to go.
I feel like he's taking a real risk here. I mean, he's really painting himself into a corner in a way. If this doesn't work in Denver, the only person that's going to look bad is him. I mean, if the things you touch on, if he goes there, new head coach, first-time head coach, some would argue better supporting cast in some ways on that roster. Certainly, as we sit here today, it is. If he goes down there and this new system that he apparently is enamored with doesn't help him, if he doesn't break those old habits, if he continues to do those same things and always going for the home run ball instead of taking the check down when he needs to and just being more efficient, and he doesn't win down there in a big way, I mean, his legacy that he's so concerned with takes a hit, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, he wants a chance. He's been talking legacy, like you say, for a while now. And, he's really at this point where he feels like, he should be running the show. He wants to be Tom Brady. He wants to be Drew Brees. He wants to be Aaron Rodgers. Well, here he is with Nathaniel Hackett, who, was with Aaron Rodgers. So he gets his chance to be Aaron Rodgers and see if he can finally get an MVP vote, right? That's been the big knock. Everyone says, he never gets an MVP vote. He never gets an MVP vote because he's never consistent across the season. He's basically been a first half MVP for 3 or 4 different seasons, but he just never finishes strong for various reasons. So here's his chance. And I feel like it's sink or swim for him. It's sink or swim for the Seahawks without him, but both are going their own ways, and we'll see if they can get along without each other. They certainly had a cap of how far they could go with each other. We saw that, and it just wasn't getting any better, and certainly, we need an elite defense again. And we'll see if the changes that they're making on defense are going to be any better for the Seahawks. But, Russ will have his chance over there. The Seahawks will reset themselves here.
Before we talk about what's next, let's touch on Bobby Wagner. I think you and I would both agree. And I sense that there's a general understanding out there that it's not the same player he was a couple of years ago. And whoever signs him next, no matter how much money they give him, isn't going to be getting – 6-time All-Pro first team Bobby Wagner, and that there was no way to justify bringing him back on his existing contract. That just didn't make sense, whether they traded Russell Wilson or not. But this thing where he tweeted out a few days ago that nobody from the organization reached out to him and let him know that he was about to be released. Is this a concern, especially on the eve of free agency, where they might be going after some big names? Is there a perception issue out there that might be a little off now because of how this was handled by the Seahawks, according to Bobby Wagner?
No, I don't think so. There's always a bit of sour grapes from all the guys who've been released or traded or whatnot from this, the Super Bowl teams. It always it seems like it ends bad or whatever. But I will say this: you also always hear that Pete and John show the utmost respect for these guys. They speak well of them after they've left. They certainly inform all of them when they're doing it. It's just sometimes it gets out ahead. Some reporter gets wind of it and, puts it out there maybe before they had a chance to actually do it, So yeah. I feel like that's probably what happened here and why Bobby was maybe upset about it, because he got wind of it from a report before they actually had contacted him. And I don't know why that would have any bearing on guys coming here. People go where the money is typically in free agency. So the Seahawks have lost out on a lot of guys because they just didn't offer them enough money.
Yeah.
It's not that not too many people are going to take the discount just to go to a particular place or to stay in a particular place. Those cases are pretty rare. So I feel like if they're just offering the right money to people, and especially there are opportunities here, and this franchise has a winning history over the last decade. So I think that still carries some weight, even with Russell Wilson and Bobby Wagner gone.
So now here we sit. It's free agency, and right now teams can make offers, get offers accepted. I don't know why they don't just open the floodgates and get rid of this 48-hour period here, but the Seahawks are in a much different position now heading into free agency than they've been in 10 years. So first, let me just ask you kind of the general umbrella question. Now that you trade away your franchise quarterback, you get Drew Lock in return. We can chat about that if you want to, and whether you think he's a viable candidate to be some sort of contributor as a starter. But where do they go from here? And feel free to comment on your thoughts on the Deshaun Watson smoke that's out there this week, or at least it was 48 hours ago, seems to have died down. Where do you think they go from here now that you decide to move on from two of your most iconic players?
Yeah, well, I feel like Wilson, the quarterback is obviously the big one. I'm not as concerned about Wagner leaving. Like you said, his play had kind of tapered off a bit, and he was making a lot of his tackles downfield anyway. So, I feel like through the draft or temporarily with Cody Barton, middle linebacker they can take care of. So we'll look at the quarterback here, which is the huge piece. I mean, we're kind of back where they were in 2012, which is kind of, there's an irony or a coincidence about it that in 2012 they were trying to get Peyton Manning, who went to Denver, and then all of a sudden they ended up with Russell Wilson through the draft, and now here we are 10 years later, and Russell Wilson's in Denver. Basically replacing Peyton Manning. So there is a funny synergy about that, the way that worked out. But so yeah, where do they go from here? That's a big question. There was a lot of smoke, like you said, about Deshaun Watson recently, but it looks like maybe they were just kind of doing their due diligence that they often do. It sounds like that really Carolina and New Orleans are the leaders for him right now. He's going to go visit both those teams. So I saw a report where from ESPN that the Seahawks aren't expected to be in that mix really. So, you can probably, it sounds
doesn't
like
seem to be a fit to me from his end. I mean, what he's looking for, especially with what we'd have to give up to get him, doesn't seem like we would be a destination that he'd be looking at. Yeah.
I mean, you never know, but there'll be a lot of fans that would be unhappy about that move, understandably.
Sure.
Yeah, he has a lot of very sensitive legal issues he's dealing with that rub people the wrong way, and me too. I mean, I'm in that group.
It's hard not to. Yeah, and I feel like it would have not been as big a deal, and it would have just been written off by most people as Seahawks doing due diligence and always competing and looking into every move. If it hadn't been for Daniel Jeremiah coming out and saying every single NFL person he talks to expects Watson to be a Seahawk. That was a weird comment for him to make. But I feel like that's kind of the one that gained a bunch of steam.
Yeah, well, at the same time, he and then Aaron Wilson also was saying, in his early reporting that that it was Carolina and Seattle as the favorites. But now it sounds like the Saints have really jumped into the mix, and the Seahawks have taken a step back on it. So it sounds like it kind of ebbed and flowed a minute there. And which, that's kind of how it goes sometimes. So yeah, so where does the Seahawks go if they're not doing Watson, which a lot of fans will be happy about? Drew Lock, it sounds like they're doing their research on what happened to him in Denver. He was a high pick, and a second round pick, and somebody that they thought that they could do something with there in Denver, and he just really did not play well for them and really seemed to deteriorate really over his time there. So, it looks like Pete and John are trying to see if they can rehabilitate him in their offense. I wouldn't put a lot of stock into that option, quite frankly, but you never know. You never know. Fresh.
I mean, there are a lot of similarities between him and Ryan Tannehill, and how Tannehill played in Miami. Obviously, much bigger sample size, but too many turnovers, not enough, dynamic plays, and then a change of scenery in a different system, and Ryan Tannehill becomes a top 15 quarterback capable of taking a team to the playoffs. When you watch, you don't have to squint very hard when you watch Drew Lock to see some of that. He's certainly talented. He's got a huge arm.
Definitely.
He's a competitor. I like the way he moves around, and he might be a really good fit in this Shane Waldron offense. It's funny to me because I thought when this trade was made, I immediately rolled my eyes. I could just hear the 12 saying, oh, we traded Russell Wilson for Drew Lock. This is the answer. But I almost see the other sentiment. It's most people are completely writing him off as an option, and I wouldn't necessarily do that either.
Yeah, I don't think he's plan A for them, or maybe even plan B, but he might be plan C. And in which case
it's up to him, really.
Yeah. And think about 2011, they had Tavares Jackson, and he was sort of just a placeholder, because you knew they were going to try and do something really big in 2012. And they went all out. I mean, sitting on the tarmac in Denver, trying to get Peyton Manning to get on their plane for a minute. They really went for it in 2012, and they just kind of, Schneider stuck to it like a bulldog with a bone, on drafting Wilson. So I mean, they will. Schneider has a plan. He didn't do this without some sort of a quarterback plan. So and the plan is certainly A, B, C, and maybe Drew Lock is C, and they're going to try and see if they can get A or B, and that might be waiting till next year's draft. And see what happens there, and maybe just maybe Locke is the starter if they can't get anything better this year. There's still some options out there, so we'll see whether they make a trade for one of the younger guys. Maybe the Packers are willing to give up Jordan Love. I know he hasn't shown a lot in his limited time, but that doesn't mean anything that he might not get better. There's some guys out there. They might, that Gardner Minshew, our favorite Coop, he could always be a
great fit. I really do.
Yeah. So, there's some guys out there. I mean, who knows, maybe Jimmy G, Garoppolo, maybe Derek Carr becomes available. I mean, these are guys, you never know. I mean, probably not on those guys, but you never know. I mean, Schneider pulls off something that, every other year, it seems like he makes a big deal that nobody was expecting. So,
yeah, I'll tell you what. The second the trade was made, because you and I have talked enough to know this about me. I'm a hardcore fan, lifetime season ticket holder. I love what happens on the field as much as anybody, but it's the stuff that happens off the field that kind of gets my juices flowing a little bit more. And as soon as this news broke, I thought, well, this offseason just went from super boring to really interesting. Like, free agency means more. The draft means more. We get to study top 10 draft prospects now for the first time in 10 years. So, they picked number 9. There's a lot of discussion about this isn't the best year if you need a quarterback to be drafting at the top of the draft. There's already starting to get some buzz that the Seahawks are enamored with Malik Willis. Have you watched enough of that kid to get a feel for whether or not that would be a huge reach at 9? I think we all agree probably isn't a day one starter. Maybe a little more similar to the Trey Lance situation, where he's a guy that's going to need a little bit of time to sit. But have you seen enough of him to get a feel for how you feel about if the Seahawks were to take him at the top of the draft?
I personally think if they're going to stay at 9, there are better guys they could take, and I'd probably go with like a left tackle there.
Right.
You know, I would just, you know, there are ways to they have other areas where they can improve themselves, you know, and I really feel like, you know, if they're gonna stay at 9, Charles Cross, the left tackle, looks like he'd be a pretty good pick there. They can move down a little bit, you know, and maybe grab a cornerback, or maybe the center, Tyler Linderbaum. Would be a good pick for them if they drop down a few spots or so.
Yeah.
And you know,
Tons of edge guys up there in that range too.
yeah, and everybody's really high on them getting a pass rusher, which, you know, I personally feel like Clint Hurt is going to change the scheme to where the pass rushers, he said it multiple times in his presser, we are going to go forward.
Yeah.
We are not going to send our
No
guys
more
back.
LJ Collier dropping into coverage. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's send Carlos Dunlap and
Yeah.
Daryl Taylor and everybody else, you know, after the quarterback, which is what they should be doing. So I feel like scheme is going to fix some of the problems. I mean, that was the most disappointing part to me, other than Wilson getting hurt, of last season, was the way the D line was used.
Yeah.
And I feel like that really contributed to some of their defensive shortcomings. So I think just scheme alone is going to fix some of that. And they don't necessarily, I mean, because they have some good pieces and a pretty deep D line too. Even if Rasheem Green leaves, they just got Shelby Harris. So I think Harris basically replaces Green. So you know, you're in a good spot there to you know, to make a bigger impact with a better, you know, with some of these scheme changes. But that said, you know, it sounds like they're checking out Chandler Jones and free agency, and they'll look around and see who else they can bring in. And the draft certainly has, you know, a bunch of guys, it sounds like. So, yeah, I could see them definitely adding to that. We'll see to what degree and what, you know, what kind of resources they actually use on it.
Yeah. And I mean, the fans always want big names, right? And Chandler Jones is a sexy name. And I saw that report too. And I think you and I are on the same page. You don't trade your franchise quarterback. Get this, I mean, they got a haul. We haven't even talked about the players we got. You mentioned Shelby Harris, Drew Lock. I think Noah Fant may turn out to be one of the gems of this trade, potential Pro Bowl caliber tight end at a position where right now with Everett and Disley both free agents, they don't have a guy other than Colby Parkinson. So you don't get that kind of resource package back and then not use it to build a young foundation. I think that's the opportunity. That's the direction I'd like to see them go. I think as we get closer to the draft, you're going to hear all the quarterback talk because Schneider's not stupid and he's going to want to try to, we know how he operates. They'd like to have more assets. And that number 9, it's a deep draft. You can drop from 9 to 15 and get just as good a player this year. There isn't a cliff up there. And so he's going to try to generate as much interest as he can in that pick from teams that want a quarterback and are willing to move up and get a guy. But I'm with you. This isn't the year. I'd prefer that they just stock this defense, young, hungry, aggressive. Let's fix the offensive line, and we'll talk about that in a minute because I think the next couple of days might be the best time to do that. And then you can take a quarterback who falls. I don't mind using one of the extra seconds if you really fall in love with Desmond Ridder or a guy like Matt Corral. But next year, the quarterback class is better, much better. There's 3 or 4 legitimate first-round guys, and you'll have the ammo to move up and get a guy if you need to. 2 firsts, 2 seconds, additional picks. That's the route I would take. That being said, how does that work with free agency? In the past, they've focused on more kind of foundational, not filler, but like younger guys that make sense or fill a role. They don't operate at the top of free agency. Do you expect them to be any different the next couple of days?
I don't know. I don't know if you can expect Schneider to do things much differently. You know, Pete kind of foreshadowed it earlier this offseason when he said, it looks like we have a lot of cap space, but we want to re-sign our guys. So, you know, that goes pretty fast. So, I mean, that was kind of a harbinger of, hey, you know, trying to tell fans, we're not going to go break the bank, you know, on an outside guy, which they rarely, you know, they never do. The only way they do that is like on 1-year guys, like, you know, it was the left tackle they brought in who ended up playing guard for him. Luke Jokel. Yeah. So they paid $8 million for him. You know, so they do that. They'll do these one-offs where they pay, you know, for 1 year, they pay a guy.
Greg Olson.
Yeah. Greg Olson, similar type of thing. Yeah. So, and often those monies that they spend on those kind of guys are wasted, you know? So, you know, they didn't use Greg Olson very much, and Jokel turned out not to be what they were hoping, and
He
a lot
wasn't-
of the times they're just
not
kind of
be good.
grasping. What's that?
Yeah. He turned out to not be good.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's hard to say. I mean, they have good cap space. I mean, they can definitely make a couple big moves. I mean, they need to, we can go into offensive line now. They need a left tackle, they need a center, and they need a right tackle. They need all three of those things. So, left tackle, the best guy out there is Taron Armstead from the Saints, but they're probably not going to pay him 15, 18 million, whatever he's going to command. So you're looking at, hey, Dwayne Brown coming back for $10 million again, which, he evened out his play the second half of last season. And I think the first half of last season was more about what was going on around him than it really was about him. So I feel like he's still playing at a high level. He could stay there for another year, especially if you draft a left tackle. That'd be perfect. And then center wise, we talk about maybe going after the Rams center, Brian Allen. The Rams, we got two Rams guys now. Andy Dickerson's got promoted. He's now running the shows as far as the running game goes under Shane Waldron. So maybe they bring in a center that they know. It looks like they're going to maybe start doing more zone running. So, that would work out for them, I think. So, I think those are some of the things you look at as far as how they're going to fill. You can also use the draft, like we mentioned before. So there's ways that they can I feel like they're going to patch up their offensive line pretty fast. And whether it's keeping some guys or adding a couple new guys.
I'm with you. I think Brian Allen would make all sorts of sense. We saw at the end of last year when the Seahawks started running the ball more effectively, and you hear from other players, especially the offensive linemen. Ethan Posick talked about this at length, that it wasn't just Rashad Penny being healthy and getting into a rhythm. It was that they had, they started out the season kind of trying to mesh Mike Solari's philosophies with Dickerson's, a little bit of power mixed with that outside zone. And then they just kind of let Dickerson run the show the second half of the season and install more of those types of concepts. And it obviously worked. We saw the results of it. And so adding in a center who's had success in that exact same system for a Super Bowl champion team, guy who I think he's 27, like entering the prime of his career, would make a lot of sense. That's probably the kind of move they would have to make early, because I would imagine he would have a market. He and Bradley Bozeman seem to be the two guys at the top of the free agent list for centers, because it doesn't seem like, blanking on the name, but it doesn't seem like the guy from Tampa Bay is going to go. Ryan Jensen's going to go anywhere now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Jensen just re-signed yesterday with the Bucks.
Oh, he did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I saw the tweet about I'm going to have to get more baby powder, but I didn't think as soon as Brady announced he was coming back, I figured that was going to happen.
Yeah, Brady called him. It sounds like, and said, hey, I'm coming back. Will you stay? Yeah. So he stayed.
Yeah. Brown will be interesting because I wonder now. It's been kind of assumed for the last couple of months that there was mutual interest from both sides on having him come back on another 1-year deal, but with Russell gone, that may change the picture a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, this kind of brings up the idea. Some people are like, "Hey, just don't worry about this year. Let's make this like a 2-year plan where next year you're setting up to get your quarterback and all this stuff. So don't pay any veterans. Don't pay Quandre Diggs. Don't pay Dwayne Brown. I've seen kind of that attitude about it. I just and that's fine. That's a great idea, philosophy, but that's not the reality of how Pete and John work. So I long ago gave up on like trying to say, oh, ideally this is what you do, because they don't do the ideal. They almost never do. So I just stick with the reality of how these guys operate, and they always try to win now. So I mean, it's hard to believe that that would happen after trading your quarterback, but that's what they're going to try to do. So to me. And they're trying to re-sign Quandre Diggs. So I mean, there are reports out there that they're trying to get that done before he becomes a free agent on Wednesday. And so it wouldn't be surprise me if Dwayne Brown is back at left tackle. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they just bring back their whole offensive line. I mean, as much as none of us really would like that, Posick at center again, and they'll look at how they finished last season and be like, yeah, we got all we need. Let's just run it back.
Sure. Yeah, could see that too. I mean, I'm a bigger fan than some people out there at the prospects of Jake Curran at right tackle. I really like him long term. And there's people that know offensive line play a lot better than I do, that I trust their opinion, who tell me that Ethan Posick played really well the second half of last season, that he was a big part of that resurgence in the running game. So I could see that going either way too. I think it brings up an interesting point though, because we hear a lot of this the last couple of days. In fact, Jeffrey Simmons tweeted out yesterday, like, I love that the Seahawks are in position for a full rebuild, but I don't think Pete and John are the guy to lead it. It's funny how quickly we forget. And they take a lot of bashing over perceived poor drafts of the last 5 or 6 years and poor free agent signings, and that they haven't done a good enough job of fortifying this roster. But it's not apples to apples. It's, they've been a consistent winner, playoffs every year. So you're drafting at the bottom of the first round. You're trading away picks to try to get veterans. It's a different ballgame. The last time they had a chance to do what they have a chance to do right now, draft at the top of the draft, fill out a young roster, focus on building a foundation. They did one of the best jobs any GM coach combo has ever done in doing that. And so I wonder if the approach in that office now is a little bit different. You kind of touched on it before, that this might be a new lease on life for John Schneider. This might be something that he's been chomping at the bit to do, because it kind of frees him up to do what he does best and what got him to the GM seat in the first place, which is scout and try to identify prospects and build a roster. It's different now.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a return to what, how they started here. I think there's a pretty big clean slate now. And yeah, I mean, you could definitely argue that, Schneider definitely was fine trading Wilson last year, because he took that offer from the Bears to Pete, and said, do you want to do it? So he was ready to go on that. He himself sounds like he had signed off on it. And so, he's ready to do this. And it just comes down to, what are the steps going to be? You're right. I mean, they have a high pick. So last time they did that, they ended up with Russell Okung as their left tackle, and they got Earl Thomas. They had 2 first rounders. Next year they have two first rounders, and they have a number 9 this year. So they're kind of in that same mode where they have those first round picks, with good value to them. So, this is kind of it could be a 2-year reset, and they could just see, like, what do we do this year? Are we going to be any good at all? Let's do the best we can to build it back up. I mean, it feels like it's just going to take 2 years, no matter what, whether they're trying to or not.
Oh yeah.
It just feels like it. Right. So, I mean, we'll see, but that's kind of where they are. They're sitting on that. I mean, and as far as, Schneider, how he does things, I would just say this, his drafts from 2013 to about 2018, 19, just were not very good. I mean, overall, like, all of his top picks were just kind of busts. Rashad Penny just finally came out and did something. LJ Collier has done nothing. Marquise Blair has done nothing. I mean, you just kind of look at a lot of these guys, and like DK Metcalf is one of his only, really good, first 2-round guys who's done something, And I will say that the last 2 drafts look pretty good. The 20 and 21 drafts, we've got like 4 starters out of that, and like 4 guys who look like they're going to be good backups. So I think, he's done better at drafting in the last couple of years. But you're right, veteran trades has been what he's been trying to do to basically catch up for other failures, make up for other failures. That's how he's used those for the most part. Jamal Adams, nobody liked that trade at the time, and nobody likes it now. And,
right.
And everybody who says that, including us, is within their rights, because he hasn't done anything and he's been hurt, So, he, some of his trades have worked, some of them haven't. So, there's a lot of hit and miss on different things, and they really just need to put it together like they did, like you said, in 2010 to 12, if they're going to do this again.
It'll be one of the key storylines of the next few months, and we'll talk again right before the draft, but it's to see if their approach changes this year, because you feel like between 13 and 18, I think there were even some instances where I recall him admitting this, that they were looking to fill holes. They were almost looking to find backups in some cases. And they even admitted that they made a mistake a couple of times in getting away from drafting guys that they thought could walk into the room and start and beat out some of those superstars. And it's almost as if they prioritized floor over ceiling for a little bit there. They get to hopefully go back now and focus more on upside. I remember when these guys first took over, they used to say that a lot of other teams, the reason that they found guys later in the draft that succeeded where other organizations failed to see it, is they focused on what a guy could do and not what he couldn't do. And they get to go back to that now. This just in, so this will be interesting. I want to talk some more about Rashad Penny. We clearly saw his value at the end of last year, and it was a big enough sample size. It looked legitimate. We saw the instincts, we saw the power, we saw the speed, we saw the ferocity with which he runs. And so you'd like to bring him back, but what's his market? Well, James Conner just signed a 3-year deal to go back to the Cardinals for $21 million. Could grow to $25.5 million, 13.5 fully guaranteed. So, 4.5. The guaranteed money similar to what Chris Carson signed for last year, but could be as much as $7.5 million a year. Is that too rich for you if that's Penny's market?
Yeah, I would only pay Penny about $2.5 million or so, and then I'd give him incentives that could bump it up to like 6. And here's the thing about the running back market. So when teams re-sign players, they will pay the teams that re-sign pay a lot more than the teams that sign a guy from elsewhere. Right. So the max for a guy that signs from elsewhere is typically about $6 million. That's it. And so Connor, he gets $7 million a year from his team, Arizona. Right. So he's staying.
Clearly couldn't find more elsewhere. Right.
Yeah. So, running backs are so devalued, except when it's your own team who really values you. But if you're going elsewhere, like Melvin Gordon is probably the guy who's gotten paid the most recently, and he was 6 or 8. I can't remember what his average was, but that's the highest you've seen in the last few years of a guy who went elsewhere and got a pretty good payday. So, yeah, Penny's not going to get a big offer from anybody else because he's only has like, a 5 or 6 game, span where he did sustained success. So, yeah. It's I don't think that the Seahawks are going to have to outbid a lot of teams if they want to keep him. Maybe some team comes in and offers him $5 or $6 million, and will the Seahawks be interested in that, or are they more in the 2.5 to 3 million range? 3 million's the projection that I see from some different, I think over the cap values him at that, and PFF did some projections on contracts, and his deal was 3 million. So that's kind of what everybody's sort of thinking for him. It's about 3 million is his top. But I would add in some incentives there that could bump it up to higher. But he needs to prove it, in my opinion. Yeah. He's got to prove a whole season. He has never played a whole season, so let him do that.
Well, and once again, and stop me if you've heard this before, because I feel like we say it every year, but it's another really deep running back draft, and teams know that, and they're not going to pay a guy $8 million and take up cap space when they could grab a guy in the 2nd or 3rd round that could be their bell cow. So, it'll be interesting to see. The next few days, the next couple of weeks, really, and how many of their own guys they re-sign. And again, this is the first time we've kind of gotten to take this approach. We've gone into free agency the last few years with a glaring need or two that needed to be addressed, and then we're either disappointed or happy with how that turns out. And then we usually go into the draft with a couple of glaring needs that we need to target. This offseason, more than any I can remember in a while, kind of sounds like it's all over. There's needs all over the place. Nothing is set in stone, not even quarterback now. And so as a fan, it almost makes it easier, right? I'm not stressed. I'm just going to watch how this thing unfolds. But what happens over the next week or two in how they set the roster will really set them up for what they can go after in the draft. Because right now, I haven't even really started studying the draft because I don't even know where to look, because there's just, it could go any direction.
Yeah, that's right. Typically the way they work is they try to solve every position, at least with something, in free agency, so that when they get to the draft, they aren't super pressed to fill a hole. There's, some positions are weaker than others, obviously, by the time they get to the draft. But, and I feel like that's what they'll do here. I think they will repatch their O-line, whether it's bringing back guys or maybe adding in, somebody else like Brian Allen. And then, quarterback wise, that's the huge question. And really the question, the answer to that will determine kind of how they do this year. Like, it just kind of comes down to, are they going to bring in a veteran? Two things. Are they going to bring in a veteran who is the guy, like they think he can be the guy, like whether it's a young veteran or an established veteran, or are they going to just go with a placeholder, and then next year is when they find their guy? Or maybe even this year. Maybe even in this draft, they look at it and they see somebody like Malik Willis, and he's there for them, and they choose to do that. Those are the two questions: is how, a guy who's ready to play that you think is going to fit, or a guy you're going to build up and it'll take till next year really to be competitive with them. So yeah, and then what they do in free agency leading up to that will kind of determine sort of how they go in the draft, like you said.
Well, and for people following along with free agency, keep this in mind too. I think you mentioned that the salary cap or the cap space number right now is around 40 million available. And some people think that's not a lot. As soon as you start signing your own guys and bringing some of those guys back, they have about 140 million available in 2023 right now as the books look. There's a lot of things you can do with structure to lower that first year number. So they can essentially, even with just that salary cap number, they can essentially do just about anything they want to at this point, can't they?
Yeah, they're in good shape. I mean, they can their top guy, Puna Ford, has a cap hit of $10 million, and Tyler Lockett also $10 million. Yeah. So they don't have anybody with an exorbitant cap hit this year. And so, and then you're looking at next year, like, Puna Ford, this is, unless they re-sign him, he's not signed through next year. Then you get into like Jamal Adams becomes their, Lockett and Adams become their top guys, next year. And they're like with really big hits, but they have so little behind them that's why they have so much cap space, projected. And the new TV deals are going to come in. And so the cap is expected to really jump in 2024. Right. Yeah. So so cap space, not a problem for them now. And, they're sitting, over 40 million. Some of that obviously goes to draft picks, and you have to save some of it for the season for practice squad and injuries and stuff. So, think of it more like they have 35 million, say, to spend. And, but that's still a lot. And they can do a lot of things with that. And, who knows if they're going to get anybody like quarterback wise. Right now, you're kind of looking like it's not going to be an expensive quarterback year for them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Drew Lock is a little over 2 million, I think. So if that's what they stay with, and then they go with a rookie, it's a pretty cheap quarterback year for them. And so then you have all that other space to use on maybe bringing in Chandler Jones or, paying a lineman or two. And that's really what you need to do. You need to build up your lines. You need to make sure your lines are as strong as they can be, because quite frankly, that's what it always should be. That's where football is won, is on the offensive line or on the line of scrimmage. And your lines need to be the strength with your quarterback. I mean, if you have those three positions, you're winning a lot of games.
Well, and we haven't talked really about the cornerback position yet. And that's one that, with this scheme change that they're going to, more of the Vic Fangio type of scheme change. And Clint Hurt talked about it, more of an attacking defense. Also, they're going to play a lot more man-to-man on the outside. And when you look at where those guys have been with that system, with the Bears and the Broncos, in either place, they really didn't have that elite number one lockdown corner, but they always had really good press man cover corners. And DJ Reed, we like, but he's a free agent. We don't know if he's coming back, and they didn't want to franchise him. Sidney Jones played great the second half of last year, and we like him. We like what Trey Brown did before he got hurt, and hopefully he'll come back. But we're not talking about corner, but could that be something they target in the next couple of days as well?
Oh, totally. Behind offensive line, cornerback is my number 2 need for them, because they don't have any signed. I mean, Trey Brown is hurt, and you don't know how he's going to come back from a torn patellar tendon. So you really need to, kind of set up a fallback plan in case he's not available. And you also still need another starter at the least, So to me, they need 2 starters. They got to sign 2 starters. Whether, Jones should be pretty cheap to bring back. It looks like his market might be like $3 million. Based on my research on it. Now that it only takes one team to blow these market projections out, right? So just saying what it looks like right now, maybe they could just re-sign him for about $3 million. Now the big question is DJ Reed. Like, he played, over the cap values him at $15 million. But no team, I can't imagine a team off of just like one good season signing that guy for $15 million.
Yeah,
I can see $8 million. That seems realistic. And the question is, do the Seahawks think that's realistic for him?
Right.
And is he willing to take that, or is he just going to, I mean, some team might just come out of the blue and say, here's $13 million and buy, there he goes, so that could very well happen. There's probably a good chance that it would happen, but you're right. Cornerback is a position that they really need to look at, and whether it's free agency or the draft. I mean, you got Darius Williams from the Rams, who might be an option for them, if they need to bring in somebody else. Although bringing in guys, has never worked in the
Hasn't
past
really
that
worked
well. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. So yeah, we've seen that happen, but they did bring in Jones from elsewhere, and he did fine. Once he
Yeah,
got up to speed, it took him a while, but he got up to
technically
speed.
Reed too, although he had only had a
Yeah,
year and half a
that's
year.
true. Yeah, yeah. So and then you got these guys in the draft. I mean, they could always look at either one of the UW guys, Trent
Yeah.
McDuffie or Kyler Gordon.
Yeah.
Both really good players. I mean, UW's awesome these days at developing secondary guys. So yeah, I mean, I think they're gonna have some options at cornerback. I think their number one goal is to bring back Reed if they can, and or Jones. So we'll see. But you're right, corner definitely right behind O-line is corner for me as far as a priority.
Now, let me ask you this before I let you go. Because we haven't talked about this. There are still other moves they can make to free up more cap space. And there are things that they could do. And if they are going to truly embark on a semi-full rebuild, there are some guys that might not make sense on the roster. DK Metcalf will be eligible for an extension after next year. He's going to be a very expensive player. There has been talk the last month or so that perhaps the Seahawks would be willing to move him and that he could fetch them a first-round draft pick. Would you entertain the idea of trading DK Metcalf?
Yeah, I've been one of the people who's been, kind of blogging about that. And I brought it up a while ago myself because I feel like they have to decide whether they want to pay him $20 million a year or they want to trade him and, get kind of a Stephon Diggs package. Diggs brought like a first, a fourth, and a fifth, I think, in net to Minnesota. So, I feel like Metcalf, even with a draft that has a lot of, every draft has great receivers these days. It seems like every single one.
Kind of like running back now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, and then, Jarvis Landry it was just released by Cleveland. So,
and you can get him Amari Cooper for a 5th-round pick.
Yeah. So that was a money dump, of course, with Metcalf is more talented than all those guys. And he will definitely pull a first-rounder plus. So, do you want to, like you said, do you want to kind of keep stocking up to really do a huge, big rebuild over 2 years and not pay Metcalf, but instead take the draft picks from him? So the question is, do they more value him on the roster, willing to pay him, or do they more value what they can get for him as they kind of reset things here over the next 2 years? And that's a big question. I'm totally of the mind that they could trade him, that he could be traded. I don't think they will trade Tyler Lockett because they just extended him. But right. I think that Metcalf, this is the year to extend him because this is his last contract year. So you either extend him this year or you trade him. Those to me are the only options. Because if you let him play out his contract, then he's gone. He gets to go wherever he wants next year. And why would you do that?
And it's going to be really fascinating because it's kind of tied into the quarterback situation, right? Like if you get a guy that you really like or you think you'll have an opportunity to, then his value could increase because you really like to have a guy that talented on the roster for a young quarterback to have as an asset. If you're going to struggle though to find that guy, then paying Julio Jones type money to a Julio Jones type player doesn't make any sense. So you would be better off getting that asset. It just another thing to watch this offseason among many. And we're just getting started. Free agency, of course, officially begins Wednesday, but teams can legally tamper today. That means they can come to agreements, and you're already seeing numbers and contracts coming out. And we'll see more throughout the day. We'll see if the Seahawks are attached to any of those names after we get off of here. Chris, it was great to have you back on again, and we'll definitely have to get back together before the draft. And we'll see just how different this roster looks then and which direction we may have to go at the time.
It's going to be a fast and furious 6 weeks, that's for sure. Good talking to you, Dan.
It's going to go by quickly.
Yeah.
That is Chris Cluff. You can follow him on Twitter, as you see scrolling at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching this, hold on a second. See, I'm rusty. I haven't done this in a while. It's music. Here we go. Seahawk Talk, the letter C, HAWKTALK is his website. Check him out there. Also, look for his name on Amazon. He wrote a couple of great books about the Seahawks as well. And then just keep an ear on the show. Now that there's stuff to talk about this offseason, I'll probably do this on a weekly basis because I'm going to have to, right? The Seahawks demand it. Now they've just taken up a bunch of my time. Thanks for joining me and Chris. We'll talk to you soon. next week at the latest, unless there are some big moves to be made later this week by the Seahawks and or Mariners, and that's probably likely. Subscribe on any podcast platform that you prefer. Sign up or hit subscribe so that you get notifications of new episodes. That's going to do it for me. Again, thank you, Chris, and we'll see you guys again soon. Cool.
You see that Pittsburgh signed Trubisky?
I saw some speculation last night. That seems like a good fit.
Yeah,
I think he's a real bounce back candidate. I think he's
talented. He just needs a good support system, I think. So
I kind of thought he would follow Dable to the Giants.
That was the word, but the Steelers jumped in and gave him a 2-year contract, it looks like. So
how much are they giving him?
He's their guy.
Wow.
It appears.
I think that makes sense. Yep. It doesn't say money. Interesting. I'll tell you, it'll be interesting to see what happens with a guy that I'm fascinated by too is Mariota. I saw last night that Indy might be a fit. But if he doesn't get a clear starting spot, man, that's a guy that I would love to sign.
Yeah, he's just an interesting case of, the Raiders tried to bring him in and maybe, rehab him a little bit to, get his confidence back and stuff, and he played a little bit there, and I don't know if he showed much. I don't remember what his games were like, but there's a guy that, was it because he wasn't talented enough, or wasn't good enough, or was it because he was in a bad situation in Tennessee? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and it doesn't make him look any better that Tannehill came in and succeeded, for sure.
Yeah.
I feel like he'd be a good fit in that offense.
But they really got the running game going for Tannehill too. I mean, Derrick Henry's just been a monster since he's been there. So, I don't know how much that had bearing on it, because then Tannehill kind of deteriorated with some turnovers and stuff. That's how their season ended, right? Is he was just turning the ball over too much, especially in the playoffs. So. He went back to what you said in Miami, kind of what he was doing in Miami. So, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see where Mariota ends up.
We'll see what happens. We'll see who signs a significant free agent first, the Seahawks or the Mariners. I've been refreshing Twitter for 5 days now, and it's like, come on. I thought this, as soon as that CBA was reached, I thought we were going to see this tidal wave.
Yeah.
But it's the big names. I think they're all just waiting for Correa and Freeman, and then they're all just kind of
it's usually got that domino thing, right?
Dang, yeah. I thought that domino was going to happen day one, though.
Well, it'll pick up here pretty soon, I'm sure.
All right, man.
Get back to work, but it's good talking to you, Dan.
Thank you, sir. We'll talk soon.
Okay, have a good one.
All right, you too.